Karen Maddox had rehearsed the introduction 3 times on the drive over. "This is Desmond Harrell. He runs our restoration work. He was kind enough to bring me here. Clean, professional, safe." She never got to use a word of it. The moment they stepped through the door, Desmond crossed the room, took Warren Maddox's hand and said it the way a man says something he has been holding in his mouth for a long time. "Hey, Dad. Sorry I'm late." Karen stopped breathing. Warren laughed hard enough that the cardiac monitor beeped twice, and a nurse leaned in from the hallway to remind him to stay calm. Desmond raised both hands. "That was a joke," he said. Warren looked at him, only at him. "No," he said. "You finally said it the right way." Karen looked at her father, then at the man she had trusted for 8 years, and understood that the 2 people she relied on most in the world had been keeping something from her. The only questions left were how long and what it said about her that she had never once seen it coming. If that got you, stay with me, because this is where the whole thing starts to turn. Hit subscribe so you don't miss where it lands. Trust me, it's worth it. Karen Maddox did not do uncertainty. She had run Maddox Development for 6 years, long enough to know that uncertainty was only another word for a decision you had not made yet. She arrived before anyone else. Her quarterly reports landed on the board's table without a single figure out of place. When a contractor missed a deadline, she did not raise her voice. She simply made sure it never happened twice. The people who worked for her respected that. A few of them feared it. A few mistook it for coldness, and they were not entirely wrong. What none of them understood, what Karen had spent years making sure no one understood, was that the precision was not ambition. It was armor. And like all armor, it had been hammered out in answer to a wound. His name was Evan Rourke. She had met him at 31 when Maddox Development still belonged to her father, and Karen was its rising deputy director. Evan was an outside investment partner, charming, attentive, and precise the way men are precise when they want something badly enough to be patient about it. He made himself indispensable in her work first, then in her life. By the time she accepted his proposal, she could no longer tell where one had ended and the other began. She found out the truth 6 weeks before the wedding. There was no confrontation and no confession. She sat across from her father's estate attorney one afternoon and listened to him explain in careful, neutral language how the terms of Evan's prenuptial agreement would hand him a controlling advisory seat in any restructuring of the Maddox board. A seat no one had offered him. A seat no one had even discussed. Karen drove home, took off the ring, and put it in the kitchen drawer. She did not raise her voice about that either. What she did do quietly over the 2 years that followed was watch Evan buy enough shares to earn himself a legitimate board seat. He came to every meeting with the relaxed confidence of a man who was certain he had not actually lost. He was never rude. He never accused. He simply asked his questions at the precise moment the answers could do the most damage, and he framed every one of them as concern. Karen learned to read him the way you learn to read whether not to stop it, but to know when to close the windows. She learned something harder, too, that the people who want something from you do not always look like they want anything. Sometimes they look like the safest person in the room. After Evan, she made herself 2 rules. She would not become involved with anyone connected to her work, and she would not trust the intentions of any man who came close while already knowing her last name. She kept both rules for 5 years. Then there was Desmond. Desmond Harrell had come into her life through a staircase. 8 years earlier, Karen was overseeing her first major restoration, a 19th-century hotel in downtown Charlotte, when the lead contractor miscalculated the load-bearing requirements for the main staircase. No one caught the error until 3 weeks before the scheduled opening. Desmond's woodworking shop had been brought in for finish work. He was 31, then quiet and exact the way real craftsmen are, not performing competence, just using it. When he saw the structural drawings, he said nothing for a long moment. Then he pulled out a notebook and started sketching. He redesigned the support system over 4 days, worked through 2 nights, and did not charge for the extra hours. When Karen asked him why he said the original work carried his name too, even if the mistake had not been his, she gave him every restoration contract she could after that. What she had not planned on was the friendship. It grew the way real things grow without announcement. He started calling when something in a project did not sit right. She started picking up before the second ring. When his wife Renee was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, Karen quietly adjusted his project schedules without being asked and showed up at the hospital with food she claimed was left over from a catered meeting, which was a lie. When Renee died and Desmond was left with a 4-year-old daughter, a woodshop, and not much else, Karen was the one who sat with him on his front porch on the worst nights and did not try to make it mean something. And when her engagement collapsed and the weight of her father's company came down on her all at once, Desmond drove to her house at 11 and sat on her back steps until 4 in the morning without offering a single piece of advice. That was the thing about him. He never tried to fix what was not his to fix. He just refused to let her be alone in it. Karen told herself it was friendship. She said the word carefully and often the way you repeat something until it stops meaning anything complicated. Underneath everything, she suspected it was not only friendship. She simply did not let herself follow the suspicion anywhere. What Karen did not know, had never known, was that for the past 3 years, her father had been playing chess with Desmond Harrell every Saturday morning. It had begun the way Warren Maddox began most things directly. He had stepped back from active management after a minor cardiac episode handed the CEO title to Karen and then found himself with more hours than he knew what to do with. He started visiting Desmond's shop under the pretense of commissioning a bookcase. The bookcase took 6 months. By then, the chess games were a fixed part of his week. Warren was 69 and had spent 4 decades learning to read people fast. He watched Desmond the way he used to watch potential partners across a negotiating table, hunting for the gap between what a man said and what he meant. With Desmond, there was no gap. That alone earned Warren's respect. But it was the way Desmond talked about Karen that told Warren the rest. Not with infatuation, but with the careful attention of a man who had been paying attention for a long time. He knew how she took her coffee. He knew which of her silences meant she was thinking, and which meant she was hurting, and what her face did when she was pretending not to be afraid. Warren asked him directly the way Warren asked everything. "You love my daughter?" It was not a question. Desmond set down the chess piece he was holding and looked at the board. "Yes, sir." "Does she know no?" "Why not?" "Because right now she couldn't believe a man could choose her without also choosing the company, and I'm not going to be the reason she has to wonder about that." Warren looked at him for a long time. Then he picked up his bishop and moved it 3 squares. "Don't tell her I know," Desmond said. "I won't," Warren said. "And then because it was simply true, you know I think of you as a son." Desmond did not answer. He did not have to. There was one more thing Karen did not know about. A few weeks before Warren's hospitalization, Evan Rourke had stopped by her office under the pretense of discussing a pending acquisition. Midway through the meeting, he mentioned very casually that he had noticed Desmond Harrell picking up a 3rd restoration contract with Maddox in 2 years. The board would probably ask about the bidding process at some point, he said, and he only wanted to give her a heads up so she was prepared. He said it like he was doing her a favor. Karen set it aside. But she knew how Evan's words worked. They settled into the back of the mind and waited. The morning Warren was taken to the hospital, Karen was halfway through a board presentation when her phone lit up with the name of her father's cardiologist. She excused herself in a voice so level, her assistant assumed it was a minor matter. In the hallway, she understood it was not. She called Desmond before she called her driver. She did not ask him to do anything. She just said, "My father's at the hospital." 20 minutes later, he was pulling up outside the building. He took her keys, put her in the passenger seat, and drove without a single question. Outside the door to her father's room, she stopped. She had walked into hard rooms her whole adult life. Standing in that hallway, she could not make herself reach for the handle. Desmond put a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to be the CEO in there," he said. "You just have to be his daughter," she breathed. She opened the door. Warren was awake, monitors on his chest, an IV in his arm, wearing a hospital gown he clearly found personally offensive. His eyes were sharp, and the first thing he did when he saw Karen's face was wave the look off it. "It was my heart," he said, "not my personality." Karen crossed the room and took his hand. That was when Desmond stepped forward, reached out, shook Warren's free hand, and said it easily the way you say something you have been meaning to say for a while. "Hey, Dad. Sorry I'm late." Warren's face broke into a grin wide enough to set off the monitor. A nurse appeared at the door. Warren waved her off. "That was a joke," Desmond said. Warren looked at him, only at him. "No, you finally said it the right way." The cardiologist arrived and delivered the news plainly. Warren needed a coronary bypass, high success rate but a full recovery period. No stress, no exceptions. After the doctor left, Warren held Karen's hand and told her not to rearrange her life on his account. Then he looked at Desmond. "I want you around," he said. "She listens to you more than she listens to anyone." Karen opened her mouth and closed it again. She had 100 questions. She chose none of them. 3 days before the surgery, Karen learned about the project. Before his hospitalization, Warren had been quietly working to turn the original Maddox family home into a cardiac recovery center for low-income patients. He had the nonprofit status and the initial funding. What he had not finished was the renovation. Desmond had been helping him design it for 6 months. Accessible handrails, ramp systems, furniture scaled for older adults in recovery. They had planned to present it to Karen as a finished gift. That same week, Evan Rourke called a board session and recommended selling the property. He framed it as the responsible choice and was very calm about it. Karen sat with both options and thought about what her father had said. The company has hundreds of people looking out for it. That project only has you and Desmond. She postponed the acquisition deal 30 days. She gave Desmond full authority over the renovation and moved into her father's house to manage his care after discharge. It was a practical decision. She told herself that 3 times. What she did not tell herself because she was not ready to was that it was also the first time in 5 years she had let someone into her home, her family, and her daily life all at once, and that the person she had chosen was Desmond Harrell. The first week settled into a rhythm Karen had not expected and could not quite name. Warren's surgery was 7 days out. In the meantime, he was discharged to rest under monitored conditions. Karen took the guest room. Desmond arrived each morning before 8 and left after dinner, and on 2 nights, he did not leave at all because Warren had asked him to stay and finish a chess game. Karen told herself she was observing, assessing, making decisions based on evidence. What she was actually doing was watching Desmond move through her father's house like a man who already knew where everything was. He knew which cabinet held Warren's medication. He knew the specific brand of herbal tea Warren drank in the evenings and had brought 2 boxes without being asked. When the cardiologist mentioned that Warren's former heart specialist had recommended a different protocol, Desmond said the doctor's name before Karen could reach for her phone. That evening, she found him alone in the kitchen washing dishes. "How long have you been coming here?" she asked. He handed her a rinsed glass to dry. "About 3 years. Every week, most weeks." She looked at the side of his face. "He never told me." "I know," he said. He handed her another glass. "I asked him not to because you'd have spent the whole time trying to figure out what I wanted from it, and I didn't want to watch you audit a friendship for 3 years. It was so exact she had no answer. She dried the glass and said nothing else. But that night, lying in the guest room with the ceiling fan turning overhead, she thought about all the Saturday mornings she had known nothing about, all the chess games, all the conversations. She had spent 5 years being the most informed person in every room she entered, and in her own father's house she had been the last to know. Aubrey came with Desmond most mornings. School was out for the summer, and Warren had made the invitation before Karen could weigh in. "Bring the girl," he had said. "This house is too quiet." Aubrey Harrell was 10 years old and had her father's stillness and her own particular way of watching. She did not chatter. She settled at Warren's kitchen table with a book or a puzzle and managed to be entirely unobtrusive while being entirely present. Within 2 days, she and Warren had their own understanding. She helped with his evening crossword. He taught her a chess opening he claimed to have learned from a man in Savannah in 1987. She called him Mr. Warren with careful politeness until he corrected her once gently. "If your father's already calling me Dad, you can probably drop the Mr." From the hallway, Karen said she absolutely could not. From the living room came the sound of the 2 of them laughing. Those evenings had a particular feeling. Desmond cooking low-sodium meals for Warren, Aubrey doing summer reading at the table, Karen answering email until Desmond took the phone out of her hand and told her the food was getting cold. It felt like something that had always existed and was only now being said out loud. One evening, while Desmond was out picking up Warren's prescription, Aubrey looked up from her book with no preamble. "Do you like my dad?" Karen looked up from her laptop. "Of course. We've worked together for—" "That's not what I meant." Karen closed the laptop. "Aubrey?" The girl looked at her steadily. "He looks at you the way he looks at pictures of my mom, except he smiles more." The room went very quiet. "Your dad is one of my closest friends," Karen said carefully. Aubrey considered this. "Okay," she said and went back to her book. Karen did not open the laptop again. She sat there until she heard the car in the driveway, and when Desmond came through the door and glanced at her across the kitchen, she looked away first. Warren's surgery was on a Thursday. It lasted 4 hours and 20 minutes. Karen sat in the waiting area the entire time, took no calls, and drank 3 cups of coffee she did not taste. Desmond sat beside her for the first 2 hours, then took Aubrey to the cafeteria when the child had been patient long enough. The surgeon came out at 2:14 and said the procedure had gone exactly as planned. Karen exhaled slowly and put her face in her hands for exactly 10 seconds. Then she straightened up, because that was what she did. Desmond came back from the cafeteria and read the result in her posture before she said a word. He sat down beside her. Aubrey leaned against his arm. They stayed like that for a while, the 3 of them in the particular quiet that follows the end of something frightening. 3 weeks into Warren's recovery, with the donor preview approaching, Karen was coming down the hallway toward her father's room when she heard Desmond's voice through the half-open door. She paused. "I can't let her lose the company over this," he was saying, low and even. "Karen needs someone who can stand next to her without making her fight the whole room. I can't be that person right now." She did not stay for the rest. In the space of a single sentence, she had already decided what it meant. What she missed because she had already turned away was what came next. "But that doesn't mean I've stopped loving her. I don't think I know how." She walked back to the nurse's station and stood there until her breathing steadied. Then she went to prepare for the preview. The fundraising preview was held the following evening. Around 60 people filled the room: donors, community stakeholders, a few members of the press. Warren attended by video from his recovery room, managing to look authoritative despite the setting. Evan Rourke arrived with 2 board members and the specific energy of a man who had calculated exactly how much disruption he could cause while keeping plausible deniability. He waited until the room was full. Then, in the measured tone of someone raising a procedural concern, he said he thought most people here would want to understand how Mr. Harrell had come to be awarded this project without a standard competitive bid. Not as a criticism, he added, purely in the interest of transparency. A murmur moved through the room. A board member leaned toward another. Desmond set down his coffee near the back wall. His expression was neutral, the look of a man deciding whether to make someone else's problem smaller by removing himself from it. Karen stepped forward. She pulled up the design files and walked the room through them without notes. Ramp grades calibrated for post-surgical mobility, handrail heights adjusted for limited reach, furniture placement designed specifically for cardiac recovery patients. The specifications were more precise and more humane than anything a standard bid would have produced. Then she said, "Desmond Harrell is not in this room because he needed the Maddox name. This project exists because my father trusted his character, and tonight I'm saying publicly that I trust it too." The room was quiet. Evan's jaw tightened. Desmond looked at her from across the room. He did not say anything. He did not have to. That night in the empty corridor outside Warren's room, Karen finally asked the question she had been carrying since the hospital. "How did he know my father? How did he know how you felt?" Desmond leaned against the wall. "He asked me directly a few years ago. And you told him. He didn't leave much room to say no." She almost smiled. "No, he doesn't." A pause. "He was right about my feelings," Desmond said. "Yes." He met her eyes. "About whether you'd feel the same way." He said he was still betting on it. The space between them had narrowed without either of them deciding to move. "I don't know what this is," she said, and the admission cost her something. "What I feel right now. I've been in a room before where I thought I understood what a person wanted, and I was completely wrong. I don't want to mistake gratitude for something else." "That's fair," he said. "I've done that too." "I know," she said. He straightened. "I can wait until you're certain, but I'm not going to pretend your father was wrong." She did not answer. She did not step away either. For a moment she let herself stand inside what was between them without trying to take it apart. The story broke on a Tuesday. A local business outlet ran the headline first. 2 more followed by afternoon. The narrative was clean and damaging. A female CEO had awarded a series of contracts to a personal associate, bypassing standard bidding. The suggestion of a romantic entanglement sat in every paragraph without ever being stated. Karen recognized the architecture at once. The documents released at just the right moment, the carefully sourced quotes from unnamed board members, the timing. She also recognized whose fingerprints were on every surface. Evan Rourke had filed a formal complaint with the board, citing altered contracts and a timeline that implied deliberate favoritism over 2 years. At Aubrey's summer program, the questions started small. A classmate whose parent followed local business news asked her at lunch whether her dad was in trouble. Another said something crueler, something about marrying rich to avoid working. Aubrey came home quiet. She ate dinner without finishing it and answered every question Desmond asked in single syllables. He sat on the edge of her bed that night after the lights were off. "Talk to me," he said. She was quiet for a long time. Then, "If you and Miss Karen weren't, if things were different, would people stop saying things about us?" He went very still. "What things?" She told him. He kissed her forehead, said good night, and closed her door quietly. He stood in the hallway of the house he had rented for 6 years and understood that he had made an error. Not in his feelings, but in his arithmetic. He had calculated the cost to himself and the cost to Karen. He had not calculated the cost to Aubrey. The next morning he drove to the hospital and told Warren he was thinking of withdrawing from the project. Karen was coming down the hallway when she heard his voice through the half-open door, and for the second time, she stopped a sentence too soon. "I can't let her lose the company over this," Desmond said. "Karen needs someone who can stand next to her without making her fight the whole room." She had heard that sentence before, or close enough to it, and like the first time she stopped listening before the rest. "But I haven't stopped loving her. I don't think I know how to." She walked back to the nurse's station and stood there for 3 minutes. Then she called her general counsel and started the paperwork. By 4:47 that afternoon, Desmond had the formal contract suspension notice in his inbox. He called her once. It went to voicemail. He sat in his truck outside the hospital and held his phone and thought about what had just happened, not with anger exactly, but with the quiet recognition that Karen had heard the thing she was already afraid of hearing and had answered it the way people answer when they are more loyal to an old wound than to new evidence. He could not blame her. He understood it too well. But he could not stay either. Before he left Charlotte, he drove to his shop and packed the one thing he wanted Warren to have, a carved wooden chess king he had made the previous winter, worn smooth from months of use. He wrapped it carefully and tucked in a handwritten note. "Thank you for treating me like family long before I ever earned the right to be called one. Whatever happens next, I'm glad I got to call you Dad, even when it was only between us." He left it at the hospital's front desk. Then he called the contractor in Baltimore and said yes. He told Aubrey that evening. She looked at him steadily. "You don't have to explain," she said in a voice working hard to stay level. "I understand." She was 10 years old and she meant it, and it was the hardest thing he had heard all day. Warren received the package that evening. He held the chess king in his palm for a long time after reading the note. Then he asked the nurse to send Karen in. She arrived expecting to discuss his recovery schedule. Warren handed her the note first. She read it. She set it down. Then he reached into the drawer of his bedside table and produced an envelope she had never seen. Off-white, slightly creased her first name written on the front in Desmond's hand. "He wrote this a long time ago," Warren said. "A few weeks after you called off the engagement. He asked me to keep it until you were ready." She opened it. The letter was 2 paragraphs, the handwriting careful and unhurried. "I love her. But right now she won't be able to believe a man can choose her without also choosing the company. So I'm going to stay her friend for as long as that's what she needs, until she can trust that she's worth choosing all by herself, without the name, without the building, just her. If that day never comes, that's all right too. I'd rather spend years being her friend than spend one day making her doubt herself more than she already does." Karen read it twice. She folded it and held it in both hands. "He's been waiting," she said. "He has," Warren said. "You knew?" "I knew." She looked at her father. "You could have told me. He asked me not to." Warren held her gaze. "And honestly, would you have believed it 2 years ago, 3? She did not answer because the true answer was no. She would have found a reason not to. She might have believed it now. And Desmond was on his way to Baltimore. She stood up. "I'll be back in the morning." "I know you will," Warren said, settling back. "You always come back." She was almost at the door when the monitor alarm sounded. She turned. The reading on the cardiac display was wrong. A nurse came in at a run, then another. Karen was moved into the hallway with professional efficiency, the door closing behind her. She stood in the corridor and listened to the sound of organized urgency on the other side of it. And for the first time in longer than she could name, she was completely without a plan. Warren was moved to the ICU within 20 minutes. Desmond was gone. The board vote was scheduled for 9 the next morning. Karen Maddox sat down in a hallway chair and did not know what to do next. The ICU waiting area had chairs chosen by someone who believed discomfort kept people focused. Karen sat in one with her coat still on and her phone face down on her knee. The nurse had come out 30 minutes ago. Warren was stable. The arrhythmia was controlled. The team was watching closely. Stable. She held the word carefully, the way you hold something you are not sure will bear weight. She heard him before she saw him, not his voice, just his footsteps, the particular rhythm of a man moving with purpose, but without panic, the way Desmond moved when he was trying not to frighten anyone. She looked up. He was coming down the hall in a jacket pulled over a t-shirt, his car keys still in his hand. She stared at him. He sat in the chairs beside her without being asked and set the keys on his knee. "How is he?" "Stable," she said. "Arrhythmia's controlled." He nodded. "You left," she said. "I was in Greensboro. Hadn't crossed the state line yet." He set the keys on the next chair. "The hospital called. Warren listed me as his second emergency contact." She looked at him. "He did that 2 years ago, apparently. I didn't know until tonight." She sat with that. Her father, 2 years ago, quietly writing Desmond's name on a form as the person to call when things went wrong. Doing it the way Warren did most important things without announcement, just making sure the right person could be reached. "Can you go in?" she asked. "Family only for now." He nodded and stayed in his chair. 20 minutes later, the nurse said Mr. Maddox was asking for both of them. Warren looked smaller in the ICU bed. That was the first thing Karen registered, that her father, who had always taken up space with a particular authority, now looked like a man who had been reminded he was mortal. The monitors were more insistent here. The room smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. But his eyes, when they opened, were clear. Desmond sat down beside the bed and took Warren's hand. He said it quietly without making it a moment. "Hey, Dad, I'm back." Warren's hand tightened around his. Beside Desmond's chair, half hidden by the curtain, was Aubrey, sitting perfectly still, with both hands wrapped around Warren's other hand, her chin lifted with the particular dignity of a child who has decided not to cry. Nobody had asked her to come in. Nobody had suggested she wait outside. She was there because these were her people, in the way that accumulates slowly, and then becomes simply the truth. Karen stood at the foot of the bed and looked at the three of them, her father and the man who had come back when he had every reason to keep driving, and his daughter who had quietly decided she already belonged here, and she felt something inside her stop resisting. Not collapse, something more deliberate than that. The board meeting was at 9 the next morning. Karen attended by video from a family consultation room 2 floors down. She had prepared for 4 hours between Warren's vitals checks on hospital coffee she did not taste with the letter folded in her jacket pocket. She presented the audit findings without preamble. The altered timestamps in Evan's documents were forensically clear. The contract amendment bearing Desmond's name had been generated on Evan's assistant's computer. The financial records showed not $1 of improper benefit, and more damaging, still showed 3 personal payments Desmond had made out of his own account when project funds were frozen. He had not reported them. He had not mentioned them to Warren or to Karen. He had simply paid because the project mattered. When she finished, she set down her notes. "I also need to address my own conduct," she said. The room was quiet. "I suspended a contractor who had given me no legitimate cause for suspicion. I did it without speaking to him, without reviewing evidence that was already available to me, and without holding myself to the standard of proof I would have demanded in any other situation." She looked at the camera. "I did it because I was afraid. That is not a business decision. It is a failure of judgment, and it belongs to me." The board voted 90 minutes later. Evan Rourke was placed on immediate suspension pending formal removal. The vote on Karen's position was 11-2 in her favor. She accepted the result, closed her laptop, and went back upstairs. Desmond was in the corridor outside the ICU, standing at the window at the end of the hall, the morning light flat and white behind him. He heard her coming and turned. She stopped a few feet away. "The audit cleared you," she said. "Completely. I know. My attorney called. Evan fabricated the documents. Yes." A pause. "And I signed that suspension without calling you, without asking you a single question. I heard part of a conversation through a door, and I used what I thought I heard to confirm something I was already afraid of. And then I acted on it before I could think clearly." Desmond was quiet. "I heard you tell my father you couldn't stand next to me without making me fight the whole room," she said. I didn't hear the rest. Something shifted in his face. What did you think I meant? That you were looking for a way out before it got too complicated? She exhaled. I've heard something close to that sentence before, not from you, but I was already afraid you'd say it eventually. And when I heard your voice saying something like it, I stopped listening. I was telling him I didn't want to be the reason you lost something he said. I know that now. The next thing I said, I know what you said. She reached into her jacket pocket and held out the letter. My father gave me this last night. He looked at it, then at her. I've had 6 years of practice at not letting people in, she said. I got very good at it, and what it cost me was this. You the first person I called every time something went wrong, and me spending all that time telling myself it was only friendship because I didn't trust what it actually was. He took the letter. He did not open it. He already knew what it said. The world I live in is complicated, she said. That isn't going to change. There will always be people with opinions about us, about who you are to me and why. I can't make that disappear. I know, he said. But I'm done letting what other people might think be the reason I don't choose what I actually want. He looked at her steadily. I don't need someone who fits cleanly into my life, she said. I need someone who makes it worth coming home to. A pause. Then you're asking me to start over. I'm asking if you'll let me. A real beginning. No hospitals, no board meetings, a beat. No my father standing 3 feet away running an agenda. He almost smiled. Can I still call him Dad? She stepped closer. Only if you're planning to stay long enough to make it true. She kissed him. It was nothing like the almost of the hallway weeks ago. This was Karen Maddox, who did not do uncertainty, making the one choice she had been circling for years and landing on it, without flinching. At the end of the corridor, Aubrey sat in a waiting room chair with a book open in her lap. She glanced up. She looked back at her book. Then she gave up pretending and let the smile happen. Warren came home 12 days later. He improved steadily and refused to make a fuss about it, which his cardiologist found professionally frustrating and Warren found personally satisfying. He played chess with Desmond on Sunday mornings. He complained about his diet every other day of the week. The Warren Maddox Heart Recovery Center opened 8 months later. Desmond was listed as co-founder on the dedication plaque. He had declined every offer of a formal role inside Maddox Development, a decision he made clearly and early and never revisited. His shop reopened the week he came back from Baltimore. He hired 2 more craftsmen. The work was his and he meant to keep it. Aubrey grew 3 inches over the winter and beat Warren at chess for the first time in February. She accepted his congratulations with enormous dignity. She had taken her time with Karen at her own pace on her own terms, and Karen had not rushed her. One evening in early spring in Warren's kitchen, Aubrey put down her pencil and said in her characteristically direct way, "Can I call you Mom?" Karen set down the dish towel. She looked at this girl, careful, watchful, extraordinary, who had decided in her own time that Karen was worth the word. "Yes," Karen said, "you can." Aubrey nodded and picked up her pencil. Warren at the kitchen table did not look up from his crossword, but his pen had stopped moving. Desmond proposed in October in the room that had been her grandfather's study and was now the center's main reading lounge, the same room where he and Warren had first spread out the design drawings and argued companionably about ramp specifications. He did not make a production of it. No audience, no choreography, just the 2 of them in a quiet room that smelled of new wood and fresh paint, in a building that had started as a family home and become something larger. He asked. She said yes. The wedding was small. Karen had wanted that, and Desmond had agreed at once, and the ease of the agreement told her something she had not needed telling, but appreciated anyway. Before the ceremony, Desmond found Warren in the small preparation room already dressed, sitting by the window in the morning light, silver-haired and unhurried. Desmond went in. He straightened Warren's tie, which had been knotted slightly off-center. When he finished, he stayed where he was a moment. "Hey, Dad," he said. "I'm not joking this time." Warren put a hand on his shoulder. This man who had come into his family through a staircase and stayed through grief and illness and old fear and all the damage untreated wounds can do, and who had never once asked for more than the right to be present. "You never really were," Warren said. Behind the door, Karen heard them. She was in the adjacent hallway, Aubrey beside her, and addressed the girl had chosen herself after what she described as not a big deal, 3 hours of deliberation. The music had not started. They had 4 minutes. Karen stood still, and listened to the two voices on the other side of the door, and felt with a clarity that needed no analysis that this was what her life sounded like once she had stopped being afraid of it. She was not without fear. She knew the difference now. Fearlessness was the absence of something. What she had was better. She was afraid of some things, and she was choosing this anyway, and the choice was so clear and so entirely hers that the fear had nothing left to hold on to. Aubrey looked up at her. "Ready?" Karen took her hand. "Yeah," she said. "I am." She pushed open the door and walked toward the life she had spent too long making herself wait for. The man who came back when he had every reason to keep driving. The father who had known before anyone said a word. The girl who asked the question the adults were too careful to ask. And the woman who finally, not without fear, but through it, chose to stay. Not because it was safe, because it was true. That's the kind of love that doesn't announce itself. It just keeps showing up. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because we tell stories like this every week. Real ones, human ones, the kind that remind you what actually matters. We'll see you in the next one.